Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician. Right now, the Canadian Blast BBQ at South by Southwest is just kicking off. Zola's just got off the stage, and while we have a few minutes of quiet, I was lucky to pull Steve Jordan, founder and executive director of the Polaris Music Prize, aside to I guess find out his history with the festival and a number of other things. But Steve, thanks a lot for. I know it's a very busy time.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem.
Perfect. So, well, first off, before we started filming, you mentioned I think this is, you said, around your 25th year of being down at South by Southwest.
Yeah, I think my first year was, I want to say 94, 95, and I took a couple of years off a couple of years ago, but I'm back.
Nice.
It's just an amazing place, and there's some complaints about the size of it now being really hard to navigate, but it's been so successful, it's kind of awesome to see at the same time.
Within your role with Polaris, what do you hope to achieve, or what do you get out of coming down to South by Southwest these days?
There's a few things. There's a lot of international people here. You have some conversations with, let them know what Polaris is doing, and lately a lot of them already know. I don't really have to explain what we do, which is always a good sign. So, but anything we can do to spread the word about what Polaris and how Polaris operates around the world, we'll take that opportunity. This is probably one of the more efficient ways to do that. Also like to keep tabs on how some of the Canadian artists that have been Polaris nominated over the past, or who are probably in consideration for the coming year, how they're performing down here, and mostly just to have March break with a bunch of friends and great food and awesome bands. It's also good, the sort of tech aspect that's been almost overtaking the music aspect of the conference itself, and getting into conversations about how that's affecting the future of everything.
Not sure to put you on the spot in that, but you mentioned the tech aspect of the festival, and the tech world and the music world are becoming ever intertwined and influencing each other.
Sure.
Have you been noticing or just hearing about certain trends within the tech realm and how that could impact music in the coming year or two?
I'm nowhere near as qualified as a lot of the people who are here speaking. But there's there's a real butting of heads with the rights holders and the people who are exploiting those rights. It's been well documented, and it's a matter of just making it sustainable for everyone. And I think that's the real, from what I have gathered, that's the real conversation that's been taking place here over the past few days.
Interesting. Bring it back to Polaris. You mentioned when you're down here, you're noticing more and more people. You don't have to explain to them what Polaris is; they already know. Even just anecdotally, as a fan, I notice more international websites and publications picking up on when the Polaris shortlist is announced and when the winner's announced. You see it on NME in the UK, or Pitchfork and Rolling Stone and stuff like that in America. Is that both? Along with the rise of Canadian music internationally, more and more Canadian artists obviously are becoming known internationally, or is that a separate thing? Would you attribute to that more international recognition of what Polaris is?
I think there's a few things at play. One of the things that Polaris does, which we don't get as much recognition for, which is totally fine, but I think people perceive Polaris as this thing that pushes Canadian music out to the world. But as much as that, we take things that have been international success stories and tell that story back to Canadians. An obvious example is Godspeed You Black Emperor, who were doing building incredible audiences around the world. So the reaction we got to their reaction of winning was the biggest reaction we ever had, because so much international media wanted to pick up on that story. Another example, Mac DeMarco, who was on a shortlist a couple years ago, and there's more examples than this, but Mac DeMarco doing so well, especially in the UK, but all around the world. People in Canada kind of didn't realize that was happening. I got the NME to come and cover Polaris, and the only reason why they wanted to actually fly over was in hopes that Mac would win, and they could and so it started as a story about Mac DeMarco. So it's as much as it is about exporting Canadian artistic successes, it's also about importing that regard around the world for Canadian artists back to Canada.
Interesting. For those who don't know how the whole Polaris Prize process works, is it completely juror-driven? I know the jury's primarily music media within Canada, or are labels, managers, artists submitting it like you typically see at awards show?
No, it's kind of unique in the world of arts prizes, not just music awards, in that there is no submission process accessible by artists and their teams, and the main reason for that is we didn't want to have a system where great records were getting missed because they missed a deadline or didn't feel like entering their music. But also because we just felt the idea of paying a fee to have your music be considered. And the other thing is just the sheer volume of jury members we have. We have 180 jury members. They are all either music journalists or bloggers, music media. No one in the industry at all. We are definitely all about a separation of church and state there. But with 180 people, I wouldn't want to take people's money to enter, or even take an entry if it was free, without some sort of guarantee that everyone would hear everything. So our process is more of peer recommendation, and it all comes from trusted sources. And one of the unseen benefits of us using that format is that people in more remote media locations can suggest a record that everyone to consider, and that could start a little brush fire of attention amongst media, amongst filterers of music who are filtering purely for the qualities and no other consideration.
Interesting. When the long list comes out, or even when it gets shortened to the short list, are you ever surprised? Like just some of the winners, like when if an Arcade Fire or a Feist or somebody like that wins, it's not a big shocker. But like a few years ago when Tanya Takak's album Animalism won, a lot of people that was the first time they'd ever heard of her. Right. So are you ever seeing what's essentially what makes a long list, and then again what makes a short list? Does it ever catch you off guard?
Kind of doesn't, because I oversee all the conversations that are happening leading up to that, and I count the ballots. So I mean, surprise is probably too extreme a word. Sometimes I'm pleasantly excited that there's something that's going to break some boundaries, or it's looking like it's going to help expose a career that didn't have that much attention. That's always really exciting. But it's not what we're about. We're purely about honoring the works, and it doesn't really matter if they're popular or heard of or complete unknowns.
You obviously have your finger on the pulse of the entire music industry and what's popular in that. I should say the Canadian music industry. Right. But does anyone have their pulse on the entire thing? But anyway, what I was going to say is I mentioned Tanya Takak winning a couple years ago. Buffy St. Marie won last year. A Tribe Called Red has been shortlisted. The Native North America compilation made the long list, I believe, last year. It seems that there's an increasing recognition of Aboriginal Canadian artists. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, do you have any, and maybe it comes from seeing these conversations, is that simply coincidence that these individual artists are known, or is there a greater attention being paid to what's coming out of the Aboriginal artist community?
I'm not sure how to explain that one. I mean, it's just where our jury went. Stuff doesn't get recognized by Polaris unless it gets recognized by the people on the jury. It's the attention for those kinds of things, and all of those artists you just mentioned share nothing artistically in common with each other. So to even say Aboriginal music, it's like saying French music. It's just and at least in French there's a common language. There's it's about race when it comes to Aboriginal music. So even calling it's just music, right? And when we got around to the position that we wanted to do things regardless of genre, a lot of that has to do with just consider it for what it is, and not really and be open to everything. And I think once you create that environment, and people listen to A Tribe Called Run and go, man, this shit is banging. Like, I'm on it. Or once you hear that Tanya Tagaq record and you go, what the hell was that? I don't think it really matters what the origin of it is, and it only matters to the extent of the context it gives you when you're being turned on by the music. You still have to be turned on by the music first, and who cares what the designation is? And that's kind of the heart of our mission.
Yeah. It's very well said. And just lastly, I believe Tara Lightfoot just took the stage, so hopefully this is all coming through. But just lastly, because so many Canadian artists are down here, this may stem back to your old A&R days, but just generally your experience from being here so many years.
Right.
For artists, either new or returning, like with the festival being as big as it's now become, do you have any kind of advice or that you could share as far as just how does an artist make the most out of an appearance here?
Well, when I first convinced my bosses to send me down here, my reasoning with them was, there's at least 30 Canadian artists playing down here, you got to send me down. Now it's like 150, 160. I think my advice would be, like, do not see this as the pinnacle, the be-all, the end-all. Do not put all your chips on the table for this event. When you do it, maximize your possibility, play as many shows as possible, play as many private parties as possible. It's an expensive undertaking, and there's supports for it, and you are kind of investing in yourself or getting other people to invest in your efforts down here. But you know, you need to do stuff after. You need to follow up. You need to keep just playing shows and have this be another place where you're playing shows. But if you're banking that you're going to get discovered by someone who's going to turn your career around just by playing South by, that's the wrong approach.
Well, I've kept you longer than I said I would. Let's catch some beers. Let's see Tara's set. I really appreciate you taking the time, eh?
No, thanks for talking to me. Appreciate it.